Hi.
Hello. In the last segment, we went into the parable of the weeds. That is the parable that's usually called the wheat and the tares. Mm-hmm. We read the parable itself and talked a little bit about it, but we didn't read Jesus' explanation, which is in the text starting at verse
36
to 43. So let's read through those verses in the New World Translation, and I'll add a little bit choice expressions from the ESV.
Okay. And his disciples came to him and said, "Explain to us the illustration of the weeds in the field." In response, he said, "The sower of the fine seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world. As for the fine seed, these are the sons of the kingdom. But the weeds are the sons of the wicked one. And the enemy that sowed them is the devil. The harvest is a conclusion of a system of things, and the reapers are angels. Therefore, just as the weeds are collected and burned with fire, so it will be in the conclusion of the system of things. The Son of Man will send forth his angels, and they will collect out from his kingdom all things that cause stumbling and persons who are doing lawlessness, and they will pitch them into the fiery furnace. There is where their weeping and the gnashing of their teeth will be. At that time, the righteous ones will shine as brightly as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Let him that has ears listen."
I suppose the biggest translation issue is the conclusion of the system of things twice in there,
right.
Rendered in most Bibles the end of the age.
Mm-hmm.
The confusion here seems to be over the expression, the field is the world. A lot of people say, well, if the field is the world, then why are we talking about the church? But most of the commentators feel that whether you say world or church, it really doesn't matter. The point is the enemy has freedom to plant his plants, his seeds, in the middle of what Christ has done, or the Master has done in the parable of the sower.
Yeah.
The confusion, though, is even made worse by the fact that when you're in the Watchtower, you think of, well, Satan is in charge of the world already. Mm-hmm. Not in this parable, though.
Oh, yeah, because it tells you who the field belongs to.
In verse 24, it's very plainly said in the very first verse of the parable, a man who sowed good seed in his field. The field belongs to the sower.
To the master.
To the master.
Right.
So he has he finally makes the determination of what's going to happen with his field. And so when the servants come forward and say, well, should we do something? Do something about this situation that's developing? The master, to maybe their surprise and even to ours, if we're Jehovah's Witnesses, says, no, my method is to wait until the time of the harvest. Then the angels are given, that is, the servants are given permission to do what they're going to want to do.
And it's not even the servants that do it. It says in his explanation, it's the angels that do the purging.
Now, of course, if you're a witness, you think, well
through the work of the witnesses.
The angels are sorting the thing out, but they're using us. Well, anyone could say that.
But the problem too is that you're the timing, because in the scriptures it says at the end of the age. Yeah. It's not during the end of the age, and it's not at the beginning of the end of the age.
Yes.
It's when it's finished. That's when he lets the angels step in.
So the servant mentality, and I can say that when you're a Jehovah's Witness, you have this mentality, which is if you have something that's going wrong, you get rid of it.
Yeah. You
certainly don't leave it there to fester and grow. But that's exactly what the Master says should happen. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, that begs the question of what is the purpose of struggle and suffering? And we want to do some videos on that very factor, because it's obvious from the way God has made the world and the history of the world and the history of the Old Testament and now the history of the New Testament church, predicted here, that struggle is somehow part of the process of growth. Right. For not just the bad stuff grows, but you grow by dint of the fact that you're in a contest, a struggle with evil, or at least with sin, and all of the normal human stuff that happens. So when you're overlaying the two parables, you realize, okay, the first one is saying we would have enough struggle, even if it were just with the results of good seed.
Yeah, because you're going to get mixed results from fine seed. Not all seed bears fruit. Not all seed does well through a number of reasons.
But the complication is even made worse by the fact that the devil is allowed to have some influence upon the field of the master.
And introduce bad seed.
So when you look at this from a standpoint of a Jehovah's Witness, they look at church history and what do they see? Well,
they see all the bad stuff.
They're trained to see the bad stuff, but in some of the videos that we've already linked to this series, we have shown things that came to our attention shortly after we're leaving, such as Jonathan Edwards and William Wilberforce and the abolition of slavery. The Watchtower has no excuse for ignoring this stuff. It happened relatively recently.
Yeah.
But as you look at church history with more of an open lens, when you open your eyes to what God has actually done during these 2,000 years, and you look back, let's say, instead of looking at the Crusades and the Inquisitions, as we're trained to do as witnesses, when you look at things like the Puritan Revolution, less than 400 years ago, or the Reformation just before that, or John Wesley and the explosion of the Methodist movement in the 18th century, the Bible Societies, the abolition of slavery, the spread of literacy in the Western world, all of these things had to do with specifically the Reformation, the Puritans, and the Wesleyan movement. This is just within 200 or 300 years of the beginning of the Watchtower.
Yeah.
So what excuse do we have for having this one-sided, this slanderous view of what Christ has done long before we came along?
Yeah, because when you're slandering Christ, because it's his field.
Indeed.
So we can, the way the Watchtower has it is that Christ's field just failed completely. It just became completely run over. It's just all weeds.
And one reason we have that impression is, one, the Watchtower says so, and our knowledge of Christian history is usually filtered through them.
Yeah.
But the other thing is certain scriptural expressions that we think explain history. For instance, Christ said 3 times in the Gospel of John that the prince of this world is coming. And we know who that is. And the church agrees who that is. But notice he's not called the king of this world. He's the prince. He's given his place. He has certain designated rights. As long as he's allowed to have those rights, he is in effect the prince, if you choose to make him that. But he's not the ruler.
Yeah.
The ruler is very plainly the man who made the field and sows the seed.
Right. He doesn't give the field over to the devil and say, okay, let's start a new field somewhere else.
It's like
which is what the Watchtower does. They become the new field, they think.
New field, yeah. Yeah, Christ has to start all over again with them.
Yeah.
But when you think of the role of Satan, let's say in the book of Job, he only can do what he can do by permission. So he's certainly not the ruler of the world. He's the prince. So when we translate that as some Bibles, the ruler of this world, we get the wrong idea. The world has not been given over to Satan's rule for 2,000 years.
Yeah.
God is still sovereign.
In the verse 38, it said that the fine seed, these are the sons of the kingdom.
Another complication, which is in the first sower parable, in the Luke version, we should note, Luke explicitly says the seed is the word of God.
Right.
You don't get that explicit reference here in Matthew. But it's obvious if you read the parable, the seed is what Christ sows, which generates the growth, the good growth.
Right.
So in the second parable, though, the seed is not the word of God.
It's the sons of the kingdom.
The sons of the kingdom. So that causes a little bit of a complication in the way you overlay these two parables.
Yeah, you were going to recommend that people get gospel parallels so that you can notice these things.
Yeah, a lot of this kind of comparison comes with the aid of a tool book like this, Throckmorton's Gospel Parallels. If you get any harmony of the Gospels, you'll get the same benefit. The parallels in rows, that is in columns, of the 3 synoptic Gospels usually, but sometimes of all 4.
Yeah.
Gospels. Rarely of all four, though. There's very little overlap between the four Gospels in the way the story is told. But
there's
Matthew,
a lot
Mark, and
of-
Luke, yes.
Yeah, a lot of similarities in the Synoptic Gospels. So just being able to see what's in and not in the different ones.
So that's Throckmorton's Gospel parallels, but any harmony of the Gospels, and there's quite a few available,
Right.
will help in this regard to make comparisons between the way the various story is told between the three synoptic gospels most commonly. And I believe in the next segment we want to take up how the church will grow and how it will be stabilized and how it will finally come to unity, because I think until you get a handle on the prescription as Paul lays it out in Ephesians chapter 4 explicitly. So if you're coming to the next segment, it would be good to have Ephesians 4 in front of you, because I think till we get a handle on the way Paul thinks about the future of the church, it's very hard to perceive why the problems have developed the way they have. And one of the shocks you'll get from that I got was unity is not at the beginning, as Paul sees it. Unity is at the end of the process.
Yeah, there's problems with all these things right at the beginning.
So stability, growth, that is maturity, and unity the way Paul sees them in Ephesians 4 in the next segment.
Thank you.